Welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue the process of bringing the endpoints served by our ASP.NET Core app up to parity with the endpoints served by the ASP.NET app. The one thing that's still missing is that in the ASP.NET app, as it was originally, users could log in. They'd see their username up at the top of the page. They could go and view information about their account. You'll remember when we started migrating controllers over to the ASP.NET Core app, we commented that part out temporarily and said we'd come back to it later. So in this video, we're going to enable the ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET apps to share authentication state so that we can have that experience of users logging in, and importantly, they'll be able to log in the ASP.NET app and have their identity reflected and respected in the ASP.NET Core app as well, so they don't have to log in twice. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at how that works. There's a blog post I'm going to put up here. Let's see. That goes through some of this. When we first previewed this feature back in June of 2022, we explained that really the shared auth is very similar to shared session in that the ASP.NET app is sort of the source of truth. And the way this works is that when we configure shared authentication, what's really happening under the covers is that a custom authentication handler is being registered with our ASP.NET Core application, which when we need to get the user's identity or we need to challenge authentication, we'll send a request via a private back channel to the ASP.NET app requesting user information. And when we make that request, we're going to include in the headers the cookie header, the authorization header, along with any other custom headers you specify through configuration, so that when the request comes to the ASP.NET app, the usual authentication mechanisms in that app will identify the user. The app will then serialize the user's claims, send them back to the ASP.NET Core app. Or if there is no user, it will send back headers to set in the response, as well as a status code, so that any challenge responses from the ASP.NET app are effectively forwarded to the ASP.NET Core app users. It's a pretty straightforward system, very similar to the way we did session, where the ASP.NET app was the source of truth and the ASP.NET Core app just relied on it. But let's go ahead and take a look at how we set it up. Now, because we already set up the remote app connection in general, this is going to be super fast. Let's start by going into the program.cs for our ASP.NET Core app. And you can see here we've already registered this remote app client, giving the URL where it can communicate with the ASP.NET app and a secret key that allows it to do so securely. Because that's already here, enabling auth on the .NET Core side is as easy as doing add authentication client, and we'll pass true. And this sets up that custom authentication handler I was talking about so that we can get identity from the ASP.NET app. Now, the reason that we specify true here, this Boolean is indicating whether that remote app authentication scheme should be the default auth scheme or not. So the benefit of setting true is that it will automatically populate the user's identity from the ASP.NET app for all endpoints without having to make any changes to those endpoints, which is nice in a scenario like this where we're going to need the user's information on every page since it shows up in the layout. But this does have the downside of meaning that every request to our ASP.NET Core app is going to, as part of serving that request, involve making a quick HTTP request to the ASP.NET app to retrieve identity. So there's a little bit of a performance hit there by doing this all the time. The alternative would be to pass false so that the authentication, the remote app authentication scheme is not our default scheme. In which case we would not automatically make that request, but any endpoints that needed to use identity as provided by the ASP.NET app would have to specifically include that they wanted to use remote app authentication as their authentication scheme in their authorization attribute. Not a big deal. It's very easy. Just add one attribute on controllers that care. But in a case like this eShop sample where we need it on pretty much every page, it's easy to just toss true in here. Okay, so we're now sharing authentication. We do want to be able to see those changes. We do want to be able to see that it's working. So if we go into our layout page, we previously commented out this login partial view where users could log in or view their username. So I'm going to uncomment that. and then we're going to come over and uncomment the actual partial view itself. Now, of course, this was written for ASP.NET. It's using ASP.NET APIs for identity. So we're going to have to clean it up just a little bit. We'll remove this using statement that we don't need. Instead of user identity.getUsername, we'll just do user.identity.name as the ASP.NET Core equivalent. And then where we're checking whether it's authenticated or not, we can do something similar. We can look at let's see, user.identity is authenticated. And in the case that identity was null, then they would not be authenticated. Okay, and so now we're able to use this same partial view to show username or redirect to the login page when users hit the layout here. Now we're also going to have to make a simple change to the ASP.NET app to actually expose that endpoint that serves identity information. So if we come into global ASAX, again, this is going to be straightforward because we've already gone through the trouble of adding the System.Web adapters and adding a remote app server, which in general is going to have modules to serve requests from the client. So all we need to do is add authentication server, and just like that, we've got a new module added that's going to serve that identity information. Now, there are options we could be setting both on the ASP.NET side and on the ASP.NET Core side if you wanted to customize how the remote app authentication worked, if you wanted to change which headers were forwarded, or things like that. You can do that, but the defaults are going to work for most cases. I do want to point out that because this works by forwarding headers and then serialing back claims, you need to have an auth scheme on the ASP.NET side, which is entirely claims-based, which is almost all auth schemes with the notable exception of Windows identity. So this doesn't yet work with Windows identity since it depends on a Windows handle, which won't serialize and deserialize from one app to the other the way you would want. So today you can't use this with Windows Auth, but for all of the other auth schemes I've tested it with, it works fine. And Windows Authentication is on our backlog to implement in the future. Okay, so at this point we should be able to run the app. It'll work. We do have this user info controller in the ASP.NET app, which will display the user's claims just as sort of a demo endpoint. This is a great time to migrate that since we're now going to be able to view it usefully in ASP.NET Core. So I'm going to right click and as before use the Visual Studio incremental migration extension by clicking Migrate Controller. It'll show me that it depends on a view, routes, which we already have, classes, which are already going to work. I just click Migrate Selection. Okay, it's been migrated. So now if we come down to the ASP.NET Core app, you can see we have a new folder for user info views, and we have the user info controller. And in fact, because we've already migrated controllers before, we have all of our basic services, our basic models, and because this is a very simple controller, we actually don't have to make any other changes. We're done. This controller is going to work on Core now. So let's go ahead and launch this app and see if everything works or if I forgot anything. So let's click Start, and we will test it out. All right, we'll give it just a minute to build here. Okay, build succeeded, and our app is launching. Give it just a minute for everything to start up, and we can test it out. Okay, and we are running. Let me pull the browser up here so we can take a look. Here is our catalog page served by ASP.NET Core, and we now have the login partial component up here. I can click Login if I need to log in. And this will redirect to the ASP.NET app where we do the login. Or if I just go to an endpoint like user info, which is protected by an authorize attribute, then we'll challenge for authentication and it will redirect to that same page. Here we go. So let's go ahead and log in. We'll be a@a.com, which is my test user here. Okay, log in. And here we go. We're now at that user info page. And we're logged in as user A. We can see the claims from our ASP.NET Core app. You see also up here in the corner, we've got our identity. So whether I'm in ASP.NET Core served pages like the catalog index, or if I go to something that comes from ASP.NET, like the session endpoint, which we haven't migrated yet, this identity is the same. We can log off, and it all works the way we expect. Now, there is one scenario that doesn't quite work yet. This is 90% of the way there. The only thing we still need to fix, oops. So let me log back in. Okay, here we go. If we are on a page served by ASP.NET Core and we try to log off from there, that particular scenario doesn't yet work. If we do that, we get an error saying that the anti-forgery token couldn't be decrypted. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it. If we come in here and look at the account controller from the ASP.NET app, we go to the logoff action, it's protected with an anti-forgery token validation attribute, which means that we can only log off if we submit a valid anti-forgery token along with the request to make sure that someone isn't trying to maliciously log users off from some other site or something. And so this is working the way it's supposed to. And the issue is that the logoff request is coming from if we are navigated to a page served by an ASP.NET Core controller, then the form submitting the logoff post is here in ASP.NET Core, and therefore, because it's from a different app, it's from the ASP.NET Core app, we're not able to send a valid anti-forgery token with our post to log off from the ASP.NET app. So there's a couple ways we can fix this. One way would be, probably the simplest, unfortunately, is just comment this out and say that you're not going to use anti-forgery protection for your log-off action. Obviously, that's not recommended. This opens up the door to a malicious actor causing people to log off from your website when they didn't intend to, which is not what you want. So this isn't the recommended path forward, but to be perfectly frank, it's going to be the quickest way, because once you comment this out with this change, the app would work entirely as I want it to. You can log in, log off from anywhere, see your account. The other thing that customers do sometimes here is a simple solution is just make sure that the users are always logging off from a page served by ASP.NET. So you could say when someone clicks the log off link, rather than directly posting the log off request, it would maybe send them to a page served by ASP.NET that says, are you sure you want to log off? They click yes, it logs off. So that's not ideal either. It changes the user experience. You have to add a little bit of code, but that's another way you could do it. The final option to make this work is we can actually update the ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core apps to use shared cookie and data protection settings so that they're able to understand one another's cookies, and we're able to actually log off directly from the ASP.NET Core app without ever making a request over to the ASP.NET one. This is the most elegant solution. It involves a little bit of code. We're going to have to add, 20 lines of code. But it's probably the best path forward because it takes a little bit of change to get it working. We're going to cover that in the next video. So we're going to end this one here. Things are pretty much working. And if you come back next time, we'll take a look at how we can allow the ASP.NET Core app to understand and work directly with auth cookies created by the ASP.NET app. See you then.